and welcome to another edition of the Plympton Podcast. I'm Andrew Hill. This edition is dedicated entirely to the planning application for the proposed demolition of the historic Colebrook House and its replacement with 14 modern-day dwellings. Council Case Officer Chris King outlined the application to members of the Planning Committee.
This planning application proposes the demolition of Colebrook House, allowing for the development of 14 executive dwellings. The application site is the residential garden belonging to the existing house. The site gently slopes from north to south and has numerous TPOs both within and outside of the application's red line. The house is currently accessed by a narrow driveway that leads to Newnham Road in the south. At this junction there is an old gatehouse known as 53 Newnham Road. The narrow lane, access, gatehouse and a group of TPO trees is not within the application red line. So this is an existing site layout. You can see the existing dwelling, a couple of outbuildings. There are also some old, rather dilapidated glass houses within the grounds. Officers are aware of the local opposition to the loss of the dwelling and sought to negotiate with the applicant to keep the dwelling as part of the scheme. However, officers were unsuccessful in securing an alternative layout that retained the house and therefore have had to consider what has been proposed is acceptable, which involves the removal of the house. As is noted in the officer's report and on the committee site visit, the property has been significantly altered and is now in a dangerous condition. We weren't able to gain access to the site, to the building. Information relating to the cost of the renovation was provided, and the council's viability officer has reviewed this and advised officers that this was not commercially viable. In addition, officers are mindful that the property is not listed and is not located in a conservation area. A listing application was rejected by Historic England in 2017. It would therefore be possible under Part 11 of the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order to demolish the property without requiring full planning permission from the authority. They would need to go through a prior notification process which looks at the process of demolition and the environmental effects of that process, not to actually establish whether it is acceptable or not. On balance, it is the view of officers that the benefits of 14 new dwellings outweighs the loss of the existing unlisted, unprotected property that could be removed under permitted development, especially given that the local authority cannot demonstrate a 5-year land supply. As you can see, the access is proposed onto Colebrook Lane. Pedestrian access is proposed in the south of the site. This will link down to Newnham Road. This increases the permeability through the site and also the sustainability credentials of the development, making it closer to bus stops, shops and other local facilities. Certain aspects of this layout, however, were unacceptable, such as the lack of footways within the site and the proximity of plots 3 and 4 in the corner here to existing dwellings in the southeast corner. So this is the layout that members are considering today. The access is still proposed in the same location. We now have footways through the site that cross over, linking all the way down for that permeability. These two properties in the south-east corner have been pulled away from the boundary and have had modifications made to them to reduce the impact on the dwellings in this location. We've also seen some improvements to the amenity space in the northwest corner. It's enlarged, it will have additional enhancements and some conditions are imposed to further improve that. We've also secured improved boundary treatment, more in keeping with the existing site, such as Devon hedges and banks. So this image, just for information, really is sort of a plan of one of the properties. So you have the ground floor layout with lounge, dining room, typically a garage, internal garage. There is off-street parking also outside. Upstairs, bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. And that's the style of the properties. This one has white render and natural stone at the plinth. Some of the properties are a mix of natural stone, hanging slate, or render as part of the materials palette. The new access for the site will be approximately through this section here. As part of the rebuild of the wall that's demolished, there'll be an entrance feature. We do have a materials condition for all external surfaces, so we can ensure that the limestone is reused within that section to make sure it's a nice entrance feature. Suitable visibility displays will also be introduced as part of the scheme, which the Highways Officer has looked at and agreed. So officers are aware that this application has drawn significant local opposition, and officers have, throughout the process, considered all the objections, not just to the loss of the house, as explained earlier. The local highway authority has reviewed both the proposed junction and the impact on the junction between Colebrook Lane and Borringdon Hill. It is their view that this development will not have a significant impact on traffic generation, congestion or safety. No highway incidents at the junction have been reported to the Council, suggesting there is not a safety issue, contrary to the letters of objection. Although the existing lane access that serves the house is outside of the application red line, had this been proposed, it would have been found unsuitable. The Highways Officer is here. He may be able to explain more if you wish to ask questions about that. Many representations suggest that the area east of the site outside of the red line should have been included in this application. The applicant has confirmed to officers that this area of land has not been made available for sale and will be retained by third-party ownership along with the gatehouse, 53 Newham Road. In officers' view, had this area been included, it would have been difficult to develop given the TPOs on the site. Given that the access into Newham Road is unsuitable, the access would likely have to come through the remainder of the site, most potentially resulting in the loss of Plot 1, so as to avoid the TPOs. Finally, construction access is a cause for concern amongst the community, and officers have sought to progress a solution. Following discussions yesterday and this morning, officers have been provided with a letter today from the applicant with a commitment from them to seek access rights from Newham Road to prevent construction traffic from disrupting residents in Colebrook Lane. They do add, understandably, that they cannot guarantee access from Newham Road, as this is subject to third-party legal agreements. However, they are keen to work with members and local ward councillors to find an agreeable solution. They are happy for Condition 5, the Code of Practice condition, to be amended accordingly. In summary, officers have considered all aspects of the scheme and sought to address concerns. A balanced assessment of all issues has taken place by officers. The emerging joint local plan seeks to provide a mix of new housing types to the residents of Plymouth, including executive housing, as is proposed here. Plymouth has a shortfall of large executive dwellings, and this scheme will go some way to meeting that shortfall. It will also help meet the city's housing shortage. This type of housing in this location is considered in keeping with the character of the area, contrary to the loss of the existing dwelling. Given that the Council cannot demonstrate a housing supply and in accordance with the NPPF, officers are recommending this development for conditional approval as it demonstrates the sustainable redevelopment of brownfield land.
The next person to speak about the application was Plympton St Mary Ward Councillor Patrick Nicholson.
May I take this opportunity firstly to thank all those who actually attended the site visit, because I think actually the benefit of the site visit is invaluable in this case. This is all about achieving the best scheme for the site. The community who ward councillors are representing want to see the best possible redevelopment, and the principle of development in the grounds is something that the community support, but we don't think the current proposal is the best that can be achieved. So there is support for sensitive redevelopment of the site. But we've just heard the final comments from the case officer to say that the applicants have been prepared since yesterday's site visit to work with the community on the access arrangements for the Code of Construction. It's a pity, actually, that the last 4 months they haven't been prepared to work more closely with all councillors and the community in achieving some greater modifications to the proposal. Plympton St Mary, this is the oldest area within the Plympton St Mary ward, one of the oldest in Plympton. We want to preserve our heritage. Colebrook House is part of the heritage of Colebrook. We support the development in the grounds, but we would like to see the preservation of the house. We would like to see the whole site redeveloped and a single entity, rather than the current landowner choosing to sell sort of 9/10 of the site but seek to keep a slither. Now, whether that's because the numbers of units on the site are affected by the size of the site, but clearly we now have heard that construction traffic can access the road, can potentially access the site from Newham Road, and I think Mr Lester has only lifted his highway objection in the last 2 weeks, and therefore through negotiation, how do we know that we can't actually have an access that's more appropriate off the existing access through negotiation? So this is an important site. The historic officer of the council is opposing the demolition of the house. There are sympathetic examples of conversions elsewhere, and the historic environment officer has quoted such an example in Honiton. And I just think, for the sake of a deferral for one cycle, with the muscle of the planning committee behind us, behind those negotiations, we might just be able to achieve absolutely the best outcome for this site, rather than necessarily approving what we got before us today. So there's a lot of merit in the scheme, but it could just go that little bit further to be absolutely the jewel in the crown for the city. And I think members should aspire to the best development possible when these proposals come to committee. Certainly the highway proposed arrangements do impact on Colebrook Lane and Borringdon Hill. And those who attended the site yesterday, you know that turning left in Borringdon Hill would be a nightmare for construction traffic. Certainly it will be bad enough if that is the main access to the site. So I hope that members will accept the case officer's proposal that if you were minded to grant today, and I hope you're not, that you will ensure that ward councillors and possibly Chair, Vice and Conservative representative are involved in the discharge of Condition 5. The applicants, who are not the landowner, I would hasten to guess that they won't be demolishing the house until they get a planning consent. Landowners tend to demolish things, not those of prospective developers, because they have no legal right to do anything on the site subject to an options agreement. So there is a chance to influence this application to get the right outcome for the site. Just on a couple of general points. So permitted development to demolish the house is unlikely because the landowner hasn't demolished the house since it's been empty. And I would suspect if they wanted to demolish it, it would have been demolished before the planning application came in. And in terms of housing land supply, we have actually at the Joint Local Plan public examination demonstrated a housing land supply to 2034 in that process. It's just that government inspectors have yet to approve our proposals. So in general terms, this is a windfall site. It will be welcomed additional housing, but we have time to get the right scheme. And I would urge all members of the committee just to give that final opportunity to push the developers to tweak the scheme and to get the right outcome for Plympton and Colebrook in particular, and actually be proud of a site that can deliver good housing for the City of Plymouth. Thank you.
Burrington Estates are the developers behind the application. Their agent, Mr Summerfield, put forward the case for the redevelopment on behalf of Burrington Estates.
Burrington Estates are a Devon-based leading developer of high-quality homes. They have 2 schemes underway in Plymouth already, one of which at Loosely Lane has recently won a National Quality Award. They are keen to increase their presence in the city, and Colebrook House offers them an opportunity to do that. In response to a number of comments received, I can confirm that the application site covers the extent of the area that is available and controlled by the applicant. The remainder of the site, which is topographically very challenging and includes a number of TPOs, as the case officer has highlighted, remains within separate ownerships and tenancy agreements, and to the best of my client's knowledge, it is intended for this to remain as a private dwelling and garden. Throughout the application process, we have worked extensively with your officers, councillors and stakeholders to address comments and incorporated numerous alterations to the presented scheme. It has been improved as a result, and both Burrington Estates and the officers, as confirmed in the committee report, are of the view that this is a high-quality development. In our opinion, it is potentially another award-winning scheme for Plymouth. In addition to providing much-needed homes, the proposal offers other benefits, including the reuse of a brownfield site, environmental and biodiversity enhancements, a new pedestrian link, investment and jobs in the city and local economy, and SIL and new homes bonus receipts. Ahead of submitting the application, Burrington Estate sought pre-application advice from the council. This confirmed that the principle of 14 executive homes was acceptable and provided advice in respect of a number of areas, including access. I should point out that the highways officer at that stage advised that access should be achieved from Colebrook Lane and expressed concerns about access from Newnham Road. Following this, community consultation was carried out with this over and above the standard requirements. This involved erecting prominent site signage, setting up a dedicated website and a mail drop, identifying the proposed development and inviting comments. In response, 3 emails and 1 telephone call were received, raising issues relating to ecology, access,
distance from existing properties and the loss of the house. As you are aware, Colebrook House has been empty for a number of years. As the officer report and the heritage assessment acknowledge, this private house has fallen into disrepair and been notably damaged. Unfortunately, it has also become a magnet for antisocial behaviour and vandalism. Most recently, an incident occurred during the planning application process and involved Devon and Cornwall police pursuing trespassers and vandals on the site. A number of people have indeed expressed the view that Colebrook House should be retained, but this is simply not practical. The property has been on the open market for a number of years, and its refurbishment and reuse, either as a single property or as part of a wider development, has not been commercially attractive to prospective purchasers. The applicant has also carried out an assessment of the potential cost of refurbishment through the application process at the request of officers, and this has demonstrated that it simply isn't viable. The heritage assessment also confirms that there is no justification on heritage grounds to retain this building. This supports the conclusion of English Heritage, who decided not to list the building after an application. The Highway officer has confirmed that access should be provided via Colebrook Lane, and just to reiterate, he has never objected to the use of Colebrook Lane and has made it clear that Newnham Road isn't suitable to provide access for a number of reasons. Whilst a number of responses have suggested that it should be used, in addition to your own officer, the applicant's engineers have confirmed that it's not practical or safe for a number of reasons. Secondly, the existing driveway is not in the control of the applicant and would simply not be deliverable. Finally, we have worked to address concerns regarding drainage, and we have a strategy proving that soakaways will work. Additional mitigations have been incorporated and agreed, giving robust protection to both council and residents, and we've agreed additional conditions in relation to this. In conclusion, there are no objections from any of the technical consultees. There are no planning grounds to suggest that this scheme should not be granted planning permission. Burrington Estates are in a position to start work on the development immediately, and your officers consider, as confirmed in their report, that this is a high-quality scheme that can deliver new family homes in the short term and help to address the council's housing supply position. We therefore request respectfully that the committee support the officer's recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Having heard both sides, Planning Committee member Rebecca Smith had some queries.
Two questions. One relates to the access to the site for construction traffic. Unless I have not heard this properly, we've talked about it going via Colebrook Lane and not via Newnham Road, but once it's out of Colebrook Lane, we haven't actually talked about where it goes then, except that it will go left down Borringdon Hill, but that's incredibly tight. Are we definitely happy that traffic is going to go left at the end of Colebrook Lane and down Borringdon? I've had to drive it myself, and okay, I'm not the most confident driver in the world, but a big HGV is going to potentially struggle.
So in terms of the construction access, as I alluded to, there's a condition 5, I think it is at the moment, is for the code of practice, which looks at the method of construction, demolition, contractors' access. At present, that condition has been proposed because we don't have a code of practice. So the purpose of that condition is for the applicant, should they gain planning permission, to submit details for us, the authority, and they have acknowledged in their letter today, in conjunction with consultation with board members and committee members if necessary, to find a suitable access that meets the needs of the community, protects the community, but also gives them the ability to actually carry out the site. So given that the current situation is that the existing access to the site, which is outside the red line, they don't actually have control over that. That's what they've advised, that the most suitable access for them would be Colebrook Lane. However, they have given us the commitment that they will look at securing an alternative access to give that level of protection that has been requested.
My other question is about parking on the site. So obviously one of the objections of the residents has been parking, and the report says that there's a view that it's not going to have a negative impact on Colebrook Lane, and that you've got 3.2 spaces allocated for every house. Just looking at the site map and looking at it more closely down here, and knowing what it feels like when you're in one of these developments, if you had more than one visitor potentially, I'm just a little bit concerned that there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of flex for parking. And I understand that the ratio is there and that under that, it appears that it's all okay. But there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of space alongside the houses or anything like that. So have we thought about that? Is there anything that we can do to ensure that there definitely won't be an impact on parking?
So I suppose the first answer to the question is that the provision of 3.2 spaces exceeds the requirements of our standards for dwellings of this size or a development of this size. The number of vehicles that the properties may have, I don't know how many vehicles they may have. One, they may have two, they may have three. We obviously don't know that. In terms of visitor parking, it could be contained within the demise of the individual residents. If it wasn't contained within that, then there would be parking on street, either within the development or in Colebrook Lane. Colebrook Lane isn't subject to any traffic regulation orders which would prevent people from parking there. Currently, informal parking takes there from existing residents. The site itself would remain in private ownership. It would be maintained by a management company. Whether they were to impose any specific restrictions themselves on street parking, I don't have that particular detail. I don't know if the Highways Officer wanted to add any further.
Thank you, Chair. On-street parking within the development itself, in terms of restrictions, has not been discussed. Clearly, this has got a very high level of parking within the individual sites. And, of course, there would be some scope, as Chris has just mentioned, for further parking to occur within the actual road itself of the new development, including in front of people's drives they were visiting, of course. So I don't see any reason why a management company would wish to impose parking restrictions within that private street. I think the expectation is that in terms of parking demand, it would function as intended and be satisfactory to take up most of the associated demand without overspilling.
Another planning committee member, Councillor Nigel Churchill, had some highways-related queries.
On site highways, could Chris tell us whether they form any part of a Section 38 or 278, and also on the same point, the SUDS Soakaway, is that in the highway, please?
Okay, so this development, as I just mentioned, will not be put up for adoption. So it won't come to the council to maintain. It will remain a private highway as part of a management agreement to look after. In terms of soakaways, each plot will have its own private soakaway within the garden. You have these light blue patches here. These are all of the soakaways. There is also one soakaway attenuation system in the highway here, but because it's remaining private, it's acceptable to have that under the highway, and that will be maintained by the management company for the site.
Thanks, Chris. So, thank you for clarifying that, and I'm sorry that I missed that on the highways. The soakaway in the highway that you talk about, correct me if I'm not wrong, the road will remain private. The soakaway, which you say will be managed, but as of April, a couple of years ago, South West Water adopted all drainage systems. Will they have a right to access that soakaway for maintenance?
It won't be maintained by South West Water. It will remain in the private ownership of the development, and it will be maintained by the management company. So in terms of maintenance of the system, any repairs or works that are required, that will be the responsibility of the management company. So each property would be privy to that maintenance agreement, and that would be undertaken that way.
Councillor Nicholson made a good point, Chair, that he would like to have some further engagement, and I understand that the applicant's agent did say that there had been some sort of extensive negotiation and it might not be commercially viable. Personally, I think it would be sacrilege to demolish that house. I kind of liken that house to you, Chair. While you sit up there very regal in your chair and we sit down here looking okay, so could that house look very regal in the grounds of a different development, and I would support something on that lines.
Is there any mileage given what's been discussed so far, I suppose, would be the question.
I'm not quite sure what the question was.
Something about legality, I think.
Oh, you want me to comment on that? Do we have time? Do we have time?
Take a guess whether I want you to comment on that. I suppose, in all seriousness, I suppose the question is, in principle, it would. Most people think it would be a nice idea to keep the house. We've heard that it's commercially not appropriate, not viable, and indeed we were told, I think, by yourself or whoever it was on the site visit that we can't actually go in given the dilapidation and how dangerous it is. So I guess the question is, if the house were to be restored and made habitable again, would that be commercially viable in terms of what you've discussed or what the council discussed with the applicants?
So, when the application first came in, we probed further on the retention of the house and asked questions: why is it not being retained? And as part of further information that was provided to us was a cost exercise done by a quantity surveyor to show us how much it would cost to renovate the property to get it back on to the market for basically a habitable condition, plus obviously making it look very, very nice, back to perhaps part of its previous glory. The council's viability officer was asked to look at the information that was provided to us, and the assessment that they made to officers was that it doesn't make commercial sense to spend the significant amount of money on redeveloping that property compared to the return that they would get. And given, back to the points I've made, given that the property isn't listed, it's not in a conservation area, we have to weigh up how far we can push from a legislative perspective on retaining that property.
Councillor Johnny Morris wanted to make some points about the heritage aspects of the site.
When you read the heritage report, not the historic the officer's report by the Plymouth officer, it really gives you an idea of why this house is not worth retaining. And it's a big square slab, and when you look at the original 1850s design with its rather magnificent flamboyant towers, huge conservatory, what's left from the vandalism of it in the 50s by the then owner is about half the size, and I think it just looks like a bog standard big square dilapidated house, and I can certainly believe that it's would be financially impossible to justify renovating it, and I think architecturally, as the being turned down for listed status shows, it's got so little merit left that I have no problem with this going the way of Pearson House. I did have a couple of queries. One relates to the drainage. Colebrook has suffered a lot from flooding, and it's on a sloping site at the top of the Tory Brook Valley. The reason I have a particular query about it, I asked yesterday on the site visit, and I've been through today on the plans, was that there's going to be a large trench. The pale blue line at the south of the site there is the large sort of soakaway trench for surface water, I understand. What I'm concerned about is that in the condition relating to that, which is the... I've just had it just here. Anyway, strangely enough, it's the drainage condition. Here we are, 4, I believe. Oh yeah, further up.
Whichever condition it is, could we...
Which is the first paragraph refers to investigations taking place before any commencement of works begins. But the second paragraph says that if that's not good enough, then something else will have to happen, but that actually then refers to occupation, that has to be done before occupation. Surely that second condition should actually also refer to before any works begins, because I think getting, I know we're talking about the architecture of the building and the transport and all that sort of stuff, but this is going up from being sort of something like 0.07 hectares covered space to 0.4.
I take the point on that. So perhaps that second paragraph should read, in the event that the geotechnical verification report is unable to demonstrate to the local planning authority's satisfaction that re-emergence will not occur, then a revised drainage strategy shall be submitted to and improved in writing by the local planning authority prior to commencement of the development. Full stop. Any Any approved work shall be implemented in strict accordance with the approved details and prior to the occupation of the dwelling hereby approved.
Is that okay, Johnny? Yep.
And then the second question was, I just wanted some clarification about the use of the roadway just out with the boundary site for the construction traffic, and how strict that is and how we make sure that's happening. Because while I appreciate that there might be some traffic impact should the development be built on Colebrook Road in parking, I don't think it's significant, but I understand that. It's actually that construction traffic having to drive all the way around Borringdon Hill and all around that area is quite a turn into there, and Colebrook Road itself is not hugely wide, whereas it seemed Newnham Road did seem a lot better, and I just wondered how strict that is and how we can make sure that that's properly reflected in any decision.
Yes, I mean, condition 5 is the code of practice condition, which refers to that you're referring to. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the applicant is going to try and find some legal agreement that they can get that access across the lane to the east of the site, so that they can bring their traffic in from Newnham Road, which would prevent the impact that you're alluding to on Borringdon Hill. Now, whilst in an ideal situation that would be what will happen, we still have to be mindful that there may be land issues in terms of gaining access over that site. So what I was suggesting in the presentation, which the applicant has offered to us, is that we will explore all options. They will look at those land agreements to try and facilitate that. If it's not possible, then the condition will be reworded so that everything is negotiated with, whether it's chair, the local councillors, to make sure that we find a suitable scenario should that not be available.
I think we're in a similar position as we were in Durnford Street with the management plan, in as much as if we get to the situation I think that you're describing, Johnny, we're in inverted commas, we're happy with the development, but we need to find a suitable access for the construction traffic. If we can, that Mr Barnard, in consultation with whichever set of councillors we decide, if we can get to that situation, then the development can go ahead. If we can't, if it turns out that land ownership means that they can't go up the existing driveway and Borringdon Hill is too tight because of the narrowness at the bottom or whatever, then no construction traffic, no management plan, no permission.
Well, in that event, we wouldn't be able to discharge the condition. So if they were to commence development without having that condition discharged, we would be in a position to take enforcement action because they had outstanding pre-commencement conditions.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Issues related to the character of the site were at the forefront in the mind of another committee member, Councillor Andrea Johnson.
My question refers to section 11 on page 45. The proposal is to provide 14 executive dwellings that reflect the character of the site. The character of the site, which in this proposal we're about to flatten the very essence of the site, which is the house. So I am not clear on how the proposal, the structures, are going to reflect the character of the site, and I would seek some clarification on that.
Yeah, so I suppose that's perhaps poor wording of that phrase. What I was trying to allude to is that in officers' view, the site itself is a large dwelling with a very large garden. The proposal is for large dwellings with large gardens. So, whilst it's not an exact character replica of what's going there, there is some sort of nod to what is on that site at present.
You mean it was an executive house of its day, perhaps?
Exactly.
And you say the site, are you limiting that to the red line or the surrounding sort of wider Colebrook area?
I was referring more to the site, Chair.
Fair enough.
Councillor Mike Leaf said he would prefer to see a redevelopment which would involve Colebrook House being retained.
I cannot see why we cannot keep Colebrook House. I think we're knocking too many of our older buildings down for no reason, and I would like to see Colebrook House retained. I do not see. Nobody's convinced me that it's not feasible to do it up again, to something else. Just financially, the reason to knock something down is always that is totally wrong in my opinion. And I think we ought to go back to the applicant again and say, can we look at this again?
Do we have any idea of costings? You said our viability people have looked at it, so I presume if it was just a lick of paint that was needed to do it up, we would say go away and keep the house, because that would, even I could afford a lick of paint and I'm not a property developer. Do we have any idea of what would be needed to bring it back to a proper state of use? Because obviously council leaves as a businessman, so he understands all about costs. So what ballpark do you think we'd be talking about?
So the quantity surveyor's report that was provided to us, that I asked our viability officer to look through, just to gauge whether that was sort of a reasonable quotation for the works, and then not only to look at what it's going to cost, but then what the return would be. From memory, I believe the cost was around the £500,000 mark to bring that property, because of the structural issues of the property. That's the collapsed roof. Internally, it's very poor. Obviously, we can't get in there to have a look. I've seen some photos. There's no lighting, etc. In terms of so they looked at that figure. And advised me that in terms of a return on that investment, they from their perspective, a council officer, viability officer's perspective, it was considered not commercially viable.
That's helpful, thanks.
Councillors Churchill and Pengelly were sympathetic to the retention of Colebrook House and reminded to seek a deferral of the application to enable the applicant to look further into this and to come forward with modified proposals which would include retaining the structure of Colebrook House.
I do not dispute the fact that it would take some half £500,000 to sort of bring the house back to its former glory. I think what Councillor Nicholson was talking about is that the community aren't opposed to development on that site, and I think what he was maybe alluding to, given the fact that it's a fairly low density, that if we were able to defer this for the applicant to talk to the council with having one or two other houses there to support the cross subsidisation of keeping that house, and if members would agree with me, I would propose that defer for that very reason, Chair.
Has that type of issue been looked at?
I mean, this application has been with the councils just before Christmas last year.
Hang on, if we ask an officer, it's courteous to listen to the reply.
Yeah, so this application has been with us for over 6 months, and there have been extensive negotiations between officers and the developer and the applicant to look at ways to, We've got to a situation where we've asked numerous questions about retaining the property, and it is the applicant's desire for that property to go to facilitate the development that they are asking planning permission for. So what is before members is what they're being asked to consider. If they felt that it should be deferred for further negotiations, I'm not sure quite how proactive that would be. I think we need to be in a position to determine the plan that is before us now. We have tried to secure a scheme that includes the existing dwelling. I've talked about the commercial viability of retaining the property. I've talked about the legislation that we have with respect to the permitted development to knock that property down. So that's the situation that we're at.
Thanks. Vivian.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's very important to stress that the community actually want to see good development on this site, but they want to preserve the heritage of the site, that is Colebrook House, at the same time. I quite agree with the deferral that Councillor Churchill is proposing, but I think also it should be deferred so that we have a construction environmental management plan that is worked up with the ward councillors and perhaps Chair, Vice and Shadow, a really robust one. We did defer Dunford Street for that very reason, to get a good management plan in place. And I think we ought to defer this until we get the right conditions robust, because both Councillor Churchill and I, we know all about the code of practice and construction. We've had, and we're going to have literally thousands of new homes out in the Sherford area. We know what it's like to have construction traffic going through certain areas. We've had to close roads and do all sorts. And it really helps to have the ward councillors on board with this, because they know where people will divert the traffic. They'll have backbends here, there and everywhere to avoid all this sort of thing. And I think we really do need that, Chair, and I would like to second Councillor Churchill's proposal to defer this for more negotiations about the house. I can't believe that it's impossible to refurbish a house, doesn't matter how old it is. I have seen houses that are practically down on the ground and they rebuild and refurbish and put apartments in them and they look beautiful. I do think they could do that, but I really am concerned about the code of practice, the code of construction, all that type of thing, as we have been so bothered and it's taken up most of our time with all the development in our area. Thank you, Chair.
I don't think we said that, or I don't think we heard that refurbishment of the existing house was impossible, unless I'm much mistaken. We heard that it was not financially viable, and those are two very, very, very different things. It's not impossible for me to buy a Porsche tomorrow. Not impossible. It's very, very difficult, though, given my financial situation. And I'm sorry, if people don't understand the difference between those two things, we're in a bit of a sorry state. In terms of the Construction Code of Conduct, I'm looking at number 5, condition number 5, and I think 6. I'm so sorry, number 6.
Sorry, just to interrupt.
Go on, yeah.
Councillor Pengelly just referred to condition 6, which is the Construction Environment Management Plan. That's slightly different to the Code of Practice, which I think we were talking about originally. So the Code of Practice would look at the demolition, the construction, all of that sort of thing. The Construction Environment Management Plan looks at how the site will protect watercourses, habitats, and things like that.
Okay, so what we're talking about are where would the construction traffic go on and off site were permission to be granted? Which condition would that come under? So that's number 5. So that is what we're talking about. I think that would be helped enormously if we were to include the ward councillors and the chair, vice and shadow of this committee. I think given the nature, even just driving away from the site visit yesterday, that struck me. So, and I'm not seeing many heads being shaken. I'm seeing quite a lot of nods. So can we take that as amended? I don't think there's any problem with that legally or planning, Peter. Is that right?
That's quite acceptable.
Okay.
Councillor Morris said he would support the proposal to defer for some conditions to be firmed up on, but not for a retention of the structure of Colebrook House itself.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chair, I think that is a good way forward. I think that's a crucial part of this application. It's surrounded on 3 sides by residential areas, and so things such as site access, hours of work as well, rather than just automatically going for the, take it off the shelf hours of work, it might be worth looking at in order to avoid other busier times of day and week. And I think that because it's pre-commencement and it will have that consultation, I think, although crucial, I think that is a sufficient condition. I don't think we should defer this on the basis of potentially being able to invest and rebuild, furbish the house. As I've said, personally, I don't think it's actually worth saving. It has virtually no architectural merit left from its original status. Which is my assessment. We've heard that the professional opinion is that it's financially unviable. And then thirdly, if we were to defer, essentially what you'd be asking for is somebody to come back with an absolutely different planning application, which included the house. We do have the option of voting it down and refusing the application and using as one of the reasons the heritage assessment of the house as has been presented to us. which would mean that they would come back, I imagine, with a different plan which addressed those concerns. But I don't think that we can ask somebody to go away and come back next month with a brand new idea about how to save the house. That's not what a deferral is for. So I don't think we should defer, and I think we ought to vote on it with the code of practice has just been amended.
I have to say I'm in agreement with what we've just heard. I think that the changes that are proposed are so big they would merit a fresh application, and that's not what we're looking at the moment. We have got a proposal to defer, which I think Nigel moved, and
yes,
somebody else second. Was it Vivian? I forget. Vivian, apologies, that'll be in your name. So the move is to defer. Those in favour of that, please. Could we move to the gizmo? That's passed. So that's the deferral. So that's passed. So that will be for one cycle. And if Chris, you can go away and have a word. You've heard the nature of the debate, and we'll bring that back next time.
So councillors voted there for a deferral, but this in the event was a short-lived reprieve for Colebrook House. At the next meeting, it was reported that the applicant would not change their mind about proceeding on the basis of demolishing the current house, and planners subsequently approved the application, which included the provision for the house to be demolished. And that ends another edition of the Plympton Podcast. Theme music has been provided by audionautics.com. Until the next time, thanks for listening, and bye for now.
The Plympton Podcast.